Welcome to Immigration Law for Tech Startups. Sophie Alcorn's mission is to overcome borders, expand opportunity, and connect the world by practicing compassionate, visionary, and rigorous immigration law in service of the betterment of humanity. Immigration Law for Tech Startups features immigration law strategies to empower global leaders to influence change regardless of their geographic location, place of birth, or citizenship. Now, here's your host, Sophie Alcorn.
Welcome to Immigration Law for Tech Startups. I'm your host, Sophie Alcorn, and today I'm super excited to be joined by a very fun and interesting guest, Robert Bouchard, who may be better known as the H-1B guy. Since 2020, Rob has reported the latest news on the H-1B visa and status, as well as other employment-based immigration paths. And he's been sharing his monthly predictions for the Visa Bulletin. Rob's background is in the human resources and global IT recruitment industries, where he developed his expertise on H-1Bs and various immigration pathways. And the H1B.com offers education and consulting services, the latest news, links to Rob's YouTube channel. And right now he's helping employers and employees maintain compliance and implement automated processes for employment-based immigration. A big welcome to you, Rob. I really always enjoy our conversations. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Sophie, I'm so excited to be here. You know, I've been a big follower of the Dear Sophie on TechCrunch for a long time, so I'm just thrilled to be sitting in with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's get right into it and talk about the latest H-1B Lottery, fiscal year 2023, where all the registrations were due in March of 2022, and those individuals have an earliest possible start date of October 1st, 2022. Tell me about your predictions and what we saw.
I think for me, I was expecting there to be more than last year, which was 308,000 plus.
Yeah.
And I was on record saying 310,000 plus, which wasn't much of a stretch, but I just expected the number to be higher than last year.
Yes. And even that was higher than the prior years that had like 200K
275,
or
I think, was the first year of the electronic registration.
And all of that happened in COVID, and the numbers still went up.
Right. And I think that was the thing that caught a lot of us who follow us very closely off guard, is they reduced the barrier to entry.
Yeah.
And because of that, now employers and everyone under the sun goes, oh, $10 is all it takes for me to register somebody. And the value of that registration is 100 times if selected, right?
Yeah.
And the rumors that started to circulate in mid-March about there being over 400,000. Sophie, I go, there's no way. There's no way. And then the report comes out and it's 483,000 plus. And we're going almost 500,000.
It's incredible.
For me, I go, wow, I was way off there, but so was everyone
And
else.
let's anchor this. There are 85,000 spots.
Right.
85,000.
And getting more in the minutia of it, 65,000 and 20,000.
Right.
In the
20 for the
categories.
master's advanced degrees category, 65 for everybody else.
Right.
This was almost a 60% increase from last year.
Right. And I think that's on the heels of an unprecedented third selection being held for fiscal year 2022.
Oh, that was crazy. It was like all year was H-1B season.
Right. And you look at the application rates. I think that's an even bigger sign of what the electronic registration has created.
What do you mean by that?
If you look at the application rates from selections, so for fiscal year 2022, I think I read somewhere around 70% of individuals selected, their applications were filed. In the second lottery, that number was somewhere around 40%. And so that necessitated the need for that third lottery, which was held in November.
So people who are less committed and serious apply at the beginning now that the barrier to entry is lower.
Right. Or I have 15 employers that put my name in the registration.
Right.
but only one of them can submit my application.
Wow. It's so interesting to me that as a policy matter, the way the laws are constructed, one company can only put in one individual once, but one individual can get offers from many separate companies.
Right. And very rarely do H-1B visa employees have that kind of option. But in the lottery, they do. And that's always been that way, even before the electronic selection, right? When paper applications were still a thing, that April 1st deadline, this was still going on.
It was still going on. I think it was less common. There was more overhead. It was like maybe your current job would sponsor you. And then if you were lucky, if you had a family friend that owned a business that was also willing to hire you, they might do it as well. But I wonder, I mean, I work with a lot of small technology early stage startups, but I wonder if in the IT consulting world, if there's a pool of applicants and they all get sponsored by all the major companies, even those that might be competitors.
If I'm an individual looking for an H-1B visa, what do I have to lose?
Right.
And on the employer side, it goes back to, unfortunately, I don't have to pay the significant legal and filing fees on the front end.
Right.
So I think, to me, and I bantered about, USCIS could raise this fee to $100 per application.
I could raise it to $1,000.
And we'd still have hundreds of thousands of application registrations, right?
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. So do we have any numbers yet? Because if we do, I haven't seen them, but maybe you know about so far, because we're, as at the time of this recording, we're still approaching the June 30th initial H-1B petition filing deadline. I haven't seen any predictions for the percentage. No. Have you?
3 weeks away, and there's a big unknown surrounding this. And I'd be willing to bet that there are many employers who are scrambling to make these applications be received over the next 21 days.
Yes, our law firm is very busy right now.
Right. And the interesting thing, Sophie, is we talk about the 85,000, and then you talk about the 127,000 plus that were selected. This is USCIS telling everyone that they only expect about a 66% application rate on those selected, right? I mean, 127,000 registrations selected for 85,000 spots. There aren't extra visas that are going to be allocated for fiscal year 2023.
So what would happen if everybody filed?
I think this is very clearly USCIS showing us that they realize there is a gap.
Wow. And
that they expect numerous individuals who were selected for multiple employers to only be submitted once.
I mean, we probably have like a 95% petition rate from those selected. But I wonder if they're internally aggregating, realizing that the same beneficiaries were selected twice, and then that only one H-1B is likely to be filed.
And I don't know exactly what is the unique identifier for the individual within the registration portal.
Yeah, perhaps the passport number. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think that there has to be some sort of tracking mechanism there. Right. I don't know what it is. I wish I did. Right. Then I could, from an educated standpoint.
But I guess what USCIS is doing is they're like, well, in calendar year 2021, we had these 4 selection periods.
Well, so 2021 was 2. Last year was 3. So if you look at the last 2 fiscal years, they've held 5 random selections.
Oh, my gosh. And so I guess it behooves everybody to have the most number of applicants approved as early as possible.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow. Wow. So how many selections do you anticipate? What's your prediction for this year?
I think from this first round that we're going to see somewhere around 15,000 still available. And I think if I look at the timelines over the last couple of years, as I've tracked this and followed it very closely, I think anywhere between maybe July 22nd, July 25th into that first week of August is if or when it occurs, we'll hear about it in that sort of 3-week time frame.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. Very exciting. What are some of the trends you're seeing these days in terms of H-1B sponsorship and processing?
I think the biggest thing that we're seeing now for me is the wage gap that's closed. If an employer goes out and says, I need to hire a software engineer.
Yeah.
The old adage was I can hire an H-1B visa employee at a reduced wage.
Interesting.
Even being compliant with the LCAs, right? Prevailing wage determinations that exist in the specific MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas. But I think what we've seen now, and this is what COVID has accelerated, is wages are on the rise, but wages for H-1Bs are on the rise. And when you look at the average H-1B visa employee now is earning over $100,000 annually USD.
That's great.
The argument against H-1Bs was undercutting U.S. workers. But I think the trend that we're seeing now is that most H-1Bs are earning at or above their U.S. peers.
Wow. So that means that the Great Resignation is real. There's simply not enough engineering talent in the United States. It is prized and folks are not taking away jobs from Americans.
No. And then you look at the wave of layoffs that we've seen in tech over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But those layoffs, if you start to drill down into it, very few are tech. There are some.
There's some.
But most are on the operations, customer success, marketing side of things.
Probably the things tech is disrupting.
Correct. And the automation of tech that's disrupting.
Right.
I think we continue to see this trend of salaries for H-1B employees are going up. And more employers are going, I need to close this talent gap. How do I do that? And I think the biggest thing here is, how do you attract an H-1B employee? And you do that through wages, quality of life, and ultimately maybe a path to a green card. And so I think now you're seeing not just big tech, but middle tier 250 to 2,000 employee type organizations go, I need more tech in my environment, and I've got to go out and consider sponsorship as a mechanism for that. Yeah,
to recruit and retain. I started seeing this several years ago in the startup space. It's absolutely essential to use immigration as a recruiting tool when you need this select talent that has skills that save you so much money in other areas of your business.
Right.
Because the automations that just a few software engineers can create can save you many jobs on the operations side, right? But that's
it
just
also
the future.
Creates jobs too. And I think that's the thing. There's a lot of data out there, but generally I use for every H-1B visa employee on staff, it creates 2 jobs.
Oh, really? Even if they're in engineering? Okay.
Right. So if you think about what jobs that's creating, maybe it's a finance and accounting job. Maybe it's a marketing job. Maybe it's a SEO job. It's creating jobs that has that trickle down. And in some areas, that number is even higher. But generally, on average, I use a 2-to-1 ratio is what I've seen.
Well, I know it's good overall for taxes and the economy, but that's cool that it's a job creation mechanism. So let's say one of our listeners is going to graduate and they're going to get OPT and STEM OPT, and they're thinking about finding a job as a software engineer at a U.S. company, and they're trying to navigate, like, how do I ask for immigration sponsorship and H-1B and green card? Do you have any negotiating suggestions for those folks?
Great question. I get asked this all the time. And my best advice is that in your application and in your initial conversations with talent acquisition, the recruiter, HR, you've got to be upfront that your status is temporary. While you can work as a full-time permanent employee, you are going to require sponsorship in order to maintain your status. If it's just an OPT, 12 months. If it's a STEM extension, you could go up to 36 months. And that allows for an opportunity to go into the H-1B lottery. Yeah. And hopefully if you're selected, then you're on H. And depending on your country of origin, there's a lot of different sort of avenues and paths for that. But to me, I've always advised individuals to be upfront. And if an employer goes, I don't understand that, I can't do that, then you need to move on. And your time here is temporary. And the reason why it's temporary is because if you're a U.S. educated with an advanced degree you have two options, right? The 12-month OPT, and then potentially if you have a STEM, another 24 months, 36 months. If you're not selected in one of those H-1B lotteries over that 1 to 3 year period, your options become pretty significantly reduced.
I mean, I tell students that you need to find an employer in your last year of your degree that's willing to sponsor you in March before you graduate in May or June, so that you potentially have 4 chances with STEM OPT.
Increase your odds, right?
Yeah. And I remember even a few years ago in the Trump administration, it's kind of a different landscape. A lot of candidates, especially women, right? The way we're culturally trained would be like, oh, Sophie, do I have to disclose this? When's the right time to talk about it? Can I wait till we're more serious? So like, I know that the trend is changing and I am on the same page with you. And also, if anybody listening needs reassurance, we get contacted by recruiters all the time saying, hey, there's the perfect candidate. The company knows nothing about immigration. The candidate's saying that they need an H-1B transfer and an I-485J or whatever. Can you help? And we love going in and educating the company. And then they're like, oh yeah, we can do this. It's cheaper than the recruiter.
That's right. That's right. That's absolutely right. And it's the cost of that talent acquisition. Yeah. And that's the story that I tell is how long are you going to allow that job to go, one, unfilled, and two, the amount of work that individual could do in that time frame that the position is open, your time to fill of that role. What is the X amount that costs your organization? And then is that worth it to, one, consider sponsorship and consider some of the burden, right, of the legal and filing fees that are associated with that employment. Yeah. That has to be part of the consideration. But I always go back and say, if the numbers are all things created equal, your expense to employ that individual versus the cost of that role going unfilled is equal, then it's a no-brainer for you at that point.
Yes. And how about any trends in USCIS processing? I'm seeing more rapid approvals, fewer RFEs.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I think you look at what are some of the reasons for the RFEs that are happening, and you've seen some of the cultural shift that's occurring internally.
We get some like, where's your office RFEs for remote work.
Right.
We can get them approved.
Yeah. And this goes back to, do I really need to post my LCA on my refrigerator? Right. Do I or do I not? And kind of the back and forth of that. And that pendulum continues to kind of swing back and forth. But I think you're seeing approval rates well over 90% in new or initial. And I think you're seeing continuing even a little bit higher than that. So that tells me that the backlog of H-1B extensions, amendments, renewals, change of employers are very high, and USCIS is in a situation where they need to move through these cases very quickly, prioritizing premium processing. But to answer your question, I think one of the things that is very interesting is the rollout phase of premium processing in certain categories. And we're looking at the timelines around that, 2023, 2024, even into 2025. And USCIS creates the most revenue from their premium processing fee. So when we look at kind of the cat and mouse of it is, if you increase your premium processing offerings, can you scale up your human resource capital internally at USCIS and eliminate these delays that are going on? But for me, though, Sophie, I continue to talk about the necessity within USCIS to accept electronic I-129s.
Do you have any sense for their RFP process, digitization? I know they've just made some substantial strides with student work permits, with online filing, but where in their list of priorities is the I-129?
It seems to be pretty low down the list. But I've heard rumors going all the way back to 2020 that they have the capabilities to accept it, that the 5-year sort of digitization transformation that's been going on, the acceptance of the electronic registration was what was supposed to be the tip of the spear, the beginning of that. And we've only seen them really take it in the I-765s, as you mentioned, for the student visas.
Citizenship.
So that makes me wonder, are they doing a case study on what is a form that generally is a lower volume? And are they trying to work through knowing that if we do turn on the I-129, that volume would increase substantially. Now, back to our point around automation. That should reduce processing. It should increase their capabilities to have less human capital, but more automation in their processing. And so for me, this is kind of the breaking point for USCIS and their need to upgrade their internal capabilities. Mm-hmm. And I've been talking about this for the better part of a couple of years, that I think the number one change that USCIS needs to make is a shift to accepting electronic applications across all categories. Mm-hmm. And how do they go about doing that where the system isn't completely overwhelmed?
Well, fingers crossed and prayers for USCIS for ease in the digitization process. Are you a person of extraordinary ability and you want to work legally in the US, but you don't know where to start? Well, I am super excited to share with you that we've built Extraordinary Ability Bootcamp, where you can learn everything you need to know about strengthening your immigration application to reach your United States goals. For being a loyal listener, I'm offering a 20% discount when you use the code ILTS when you sign up. You can find more information in the show notes. Thanks. Are you familiar with concurrent cap-exempt H-1Bs? Because this is a trend that I'm a big fan of. We've been working with Open Avenues Foundation. We've been looking at getting more capacity for folks with bachelor's degrees to get H-1Bs without the lottery if they'll work at a school, at a university doing, group projects with STEM students. Do you think companies are becoming more receptive to programs like this?
I would hope so. And I think that's one of the biggest unknowns for employers is that an H-1B employee can have a concurrent H-1B, which means they actually have multiple employers that hold their H-1B. And that was the thing. You had an article several months ago that talked about concurrent H-1Bs, and it was specifically for startups and H-1Bs having 59% ownership in an organization and having that startup hold their H-1B, but also maintaining employment with another employer and working full time.
I love that you read my articles. Thank you, Rob.
Hey, listen, I scour all corners of the web looking for things that interest me in immigration. And your piece on the concurrent H-1B was one that I think a lot of the assumption is you can only have one employer hold your H-1B. Right. But working through the cap-exempt avenue is very interesting, right? Can we talk about not nonprofit based and what that means, right? You mentioned universities, but we talk about research institutions, right? Certain churches that file or qualify for nonprofit depending.
Right. Especially if they're like associated with a university of that religion. There's different ways to do it. There's great potential here. I've had success getting tons of these approved. It's real. I think I'm trying to build out more nonprofit capacity to host individuals and qualify. And it'll be exciting, but I think that's really going to be the next step for all the 400,000 people that don't get H-1Bs in the initial draw.
So I have a question for you. Are you seeing on the non-exempt side, is this a trend that we're seeing more of as well? Because again, I'm not as familiar with...
Well, this particular formula that I'm talking about is where you get an H-1B for 5 hours a week through a nonprofit to do work for your for-profit company, leading students through group projects. And then the for-profit employer can piggyback on a second concurrent it becomes cap exempt H-1B for 35 hours a week for the rest of the full-time work. So that's like slowly gaining momentum. The other thing that's just harder, especially in the tech world, but like if you had a 40-hour-a-week job at one company and you already went through the lottery and you're on H-1B, you could probably get away with getting another 5 to 10-hour-a-week job approved for a second company. So that's totally possible from an immigration standpoint. I think that there's other issues that could come up from an employment law perspective, NDA perspective, intellectual property, because I don't know that the primary employer wants you to go around doing a second job, but it may be legally technically possible, but you just want to be really careful about it, right?
so interesting.
Yeah, there's possibilities.
Well, and very complicated, right? And it goes back to the risk for the individual.
Right.
Is it worth it at the end of the day as you're deciding for you to risk your current employment for 5 to 10 hours for another organization?
And the times when I see that being exciting to people is if they're already in some sort of managerial strategic role and they have another opportunity at a smaller company where if they can help get it off the ground, they have a lot of potential upside to scale their role at that other company. And then they would consider leaving
executive leadership type.
Exactly. With equity. Yeah. Well, let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk about the Visa Bulletin.
Yes.
How do you predict it? What's your success rate? There's also like the chats with Charlie. Tell me about your interest in this.
I've been tracking the Visa Bulletin now for a better part of 10 years. Started back in 2011, 2010 timeframe, and would always have individuals tell me, yeah, I'm not sure when my priority date is going to come current, the Visa Bulletin. And I'm like, Visa Bulletin, what is this? So I started following along. And the interesting thing about the Visa Bulletin, as it has grown in popularity because of the extensive backlog that's grown specifically for individuals from China and India, the demand and constant questions around my opinions on what do I think the movement is going to look like month over month organically evolved starting in October, November of 2020. And so I decided I did a live stream where I talked about the Visa Bulletin, and then it became a production-based video, which every month is my most watched video on my channel.
Wow.
And I've been accurate anywhere between 25% to as high as 88% more recently.
Okay.
And the reasoning, though, is that we've seen so little movement across most of the categories other than EB2 India specifically. So it's made it easier for me to have a higher percentage.
I wish it were the other way, though.
Yes, I do too. But what it shows you is that because of the allotment and the allocation that we've had over the last couple of years, it's been 260 to 290,000 when annually there's only 140,000 available. So a lot of what's referred to as spillover goes to the first come or first in line.
Right.
And a lot of those individuals just are from India, right?
Yep.
Because they have the largest backlog, the largest number of I-140s that have been filed and approved over the last 10, 15 years.
It's a country with a huge population. So of course there's going to be a lot of geniuses with PhDs and extraordinary ability.
Right. Absolutely. And then you look at what happened in October of 2020.
Yeah.
Where you saw this escalation, very aggressive forward movement that occurred in India EB3, which created all of this demand to downgrade from EB2 to EB3. And there are thousands of individuals who did that who are still waiting in limbo.
Oh my goodness.
And I was on record many times stating that if you have a certified EB2, I'm not downgrading unless there is a reason for that. And over the course of the year, I stuck with that until during one of the chats with Charlie sessions, Charlie said, having a downgrade while that is pending is the best of both worlds. But then what we saw shortly after that was the retrogression that occurred in November, both in China, EB3 for China and India. And a lot of that was the documentarily qualified number versus the allocated number for this fiscal year was not in line. Whereas demand for EB2, the documentarily qualified number was below what potentially could spill over. And so I think when you saw that retrogression, you had a lot of folks go, I downgraded, now I need to upgrade.
Oh my goodness.
The back and forth of that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the trend now that has occurred is we saw in the last 6 months, very aggressive forward movement for India EB2. And right now, dates of filing sit at December 2014, and final action dates for June were September of 2014. And so this feels eerily familiar to last year's EB3 movement, and where the Department of State and USCIS made a conscious effort to move up that EB3 final action date to coincide with the dates of filing. And this kind of feels like that's occurring here in EB2. But July, I don't know. I think we just throw the dice up in the air and see where they fall, because I think anyone who says, I know for sure this is what's going to happen, is selling us a bill of goods that isn't reality. And the fact is, I really am so unsure of if there's going to be movement in any other categories other than maybe just final action dates in India EB2 advancing by a month. I hope I'm wrong.
Wow.
I've heard rumors that EB3 could see some advancement both in India and China. Mm-hmm. But my prediction for July was to keep it as is, because we have not seen any movement since November 2021 in those categories.
My goodness. My goodness. Okay, some rapid fire questions. Top questions you get on your YouTube channel.
When do you think my priority date is going to come current? And I try to answer every one of them, and I have several that I need to go back and answer, but I always try to start my answer with, as of right now.
Yeah.
Because it's such a fluid situation, it seems like that it changes from week to week.
Here's a question on that I get a lot. And I had Stuart Anderson on the podcast from the National Foundation for American Policy, which is a big immigration think tank. So before the pandemic and the Trump years, there was this prediction that if you get in line now for an EB2 from India, your wait time is going to be 151 years. Mm-hmm. I have not, and I asked him about this, I don't know that there's any sort of data available to calculate what that would be at this point. Is your gut that has increased overall or decreased substantially? I have no idea.
So that to me seems like an inflated number that may not be completely accurate. Okay. But again, this is an opinion here. Right. I go based on one thing, and that is from your priority date to when your date is current. Okay.
So you're trying to give like actual real-time data.
Correct. So if I look at the trend earlier in the year, it was about 3,800 days.
Okay.
That number's trended down anywhere between 3,200 to 3,300 days. So from the date of your priority date to the date you're current, right? And so still, if you look at that, it's still about 10 years, give or take a few months here, anywhere between 9.6 months to 10 years. I generally like to track the days against. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have your green card in hand. To me, that means that your date is current. And so that's what I base it off of. The 150, they may be going based on when you're actually going to have your green card in hand, right? Because it's not just the individual. It's the individual plus dependent and their spouse. That's
okay. It's so complicated. Oh.
Yes.
All right. Top immigration reform you would like to see?
That's a great question. I've always been a proponent of a merit-based system. So I'm not saying we go completely to some sort of point-based system. But what I would like to see is a hybrid approach to the way H-1B visas are distributed, specifically in the non-exempt category. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by a hybrid approach is that I would like to see some sort of wage-based allocation for the specific levels. So level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, okay? Every employer has a different level of individual that they're sponsoring based on their skill set. What I would like to see is that wages in those highest levels based on a specific MSA are awarded, right? Oh. So it removes the lottery and it bases it more on a merit and skill, which is who has.
And this was that regulation that almost made it through, but got killed.
Theirs was a little different though, because it included all levels. And it said that the highest earners would be awarded. Okay. For me, what I want to see is a 25% allocation in each of the levels, and then drilling down into the specific metropolitan areas, right? Okay. So that those earners are awarded based on their merit and skill. Now, would a points-based system where we had sort of no regulation, there wasn't a cap on the number that was allowed from an employer standpoint, is that what I would love to see? Yes. But we go back to the 2015 timeframe. The Cotton Bill, as I refer to it, was the intention to put in a points-based system here in the U.S. And that was something that the Trump administration ran on, but we never really heard much from and since, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Final advice or tips for our listeners, HR folks in organizations, individuals looking for H-1Bs or potentially starting startups that may need to hire people on H-1Bs. So H-1B guy, anything else we should keep in mind?
I think that accepting and understanding that H-1B visa employees are an added value to your organization and can fill talent gaps, specifically in STEM. If I'm a startup, if I'm a mid-level, and even as we see in big tech and large enterprise, you have to be open to the concept and idea of accepting candidates to fill your needs, whether it's an H-1B visa or a U.S. citizen or everything kind of in between. But what we have to understand is that H-1B visas come with a different set of regulations and compliance. And quite honestly, because their time here is temporary, right? Maximum of up to 6 years. If this is an individual that's contributing to your organization, you have to think long-term. And that long-term is, can I find a U.S. citizen or a green card holder that can fill this role? And if my answer is no, then I need to think about long-term, do I want to sponsor my H-1B employee from a green card perspective? Because if you don't, then their time here is temporary and it will come to an end. And if you don't have a plan B in place, whether that's green card sponsorship or, as we hear a lot now more recently, this term global parking, right? If you don't have one of those options, then you're going to be right back to where you were, which is another gap.
Yep. And it's sort of just the respectful thing to do for another human. Hopefully you see each other eye level. It's like a courtesy and respect thing that this individual's life is hanging on whether they can get their chances maximized.
Absolutely. And I think as we've learned through COVID, right, this global digital society that we all now live and work and operate in, and we're navigating through what is new normal still, the war for talent still exists. And unemployment in tech is less than 2%.
Oh my God.
So the gap is real.
Final question, Rob, because I've just got to know, you're not from India. You appear to me to be an American white dude. I know you live in Atlanta, right? Like, you're so passionate about this. Like, what's your attraction to it? Why do you love it?
I think that, to me, first of all, I love this country, and we've always been on the forefront of innovation. And I've always been really curious about where people come from and why they come to the U.S. and why are they seeking an opportunity here. And so through my experience in the staffing world, I gained exposure to this really complicated and complex work authorization, this status. And I saw how there would be jobs that would go unfilled because they weren't open to considering alternate solutions.
Right.
And so for me, from a recruiter mindset, I want my clients to understand that you have options. And if I'm a staffing professional, I'm looking at, in talent acquisition, I'm going, I've got 30 or 40 open recs and I've got 0 applications on them. What am I going to do? How am I going to fill these jobs? Right? The other side to that is that individuals who are thinking about coming to the U.S. and want to work here need to understand the H-1B visa is very restrictive. It is temporary. And if you don't have a plan, and if you are coming here thinking that you're owed something, then I want to spread the realization that, listen, you can come here, you can earn a great living, you can create opportunity that lasts for you and your family, but you need to understand that there is a 10 plus year backlog waiting you if you're from India, or a 5-6 year backlog if you're from China. And that there is discrimination within those ranks based on country of origin. And so to me, that's something that, like, I became very passionate about. And as the platform grew and my audience has grown, I think that I provide a very unique voice in this space.
Absolutely.
Because I come at it from an employer standpoint and wanting to bridge that gap.
Well, I appreciate your forthrightness, your compassion, the clarity with which you explain these complicated concepts. So just thank you so much, Rob, for joining me today to share your expertise with us.
Thanks, Sophie. So much. My pleasure. Love to continue the conversation.
Thank you. To all of our listeners, check out our show notes. There you can subscribe to our newsletter and also click on the link to Rob's website, the H1Bguide.com. We really appreciate it when you rate, review, and surprise us and subscribe to us. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.